back on the camera, so that's that's good protocol right there. Good morning, class. I can tell we're not quite in the swing of things after the new year yet. This is our first class after Christmas and all that stuff, huh? Should I have a soft start because we think people are going to roll in, or do you think people just forgot about Bible class?
They're
Probably still sleeping. It's not like we changed our clocks. We just changed our calendars. I do actually. For a while I had two, just one just in case. But yeah, I like many people use my phone or my watch these days as an alarm clock. It's pretty wild. But I no longer stress about changing it for daylight savings because the phone's smart enough to do that. The only thing I worry about is just having the phone on the charger. That's the thing. Yeah. The resident Apple employee is nodding emphatically at me. So in reality is neither of these are a problem for me because my dog and my son are sure to get me up before my alarm. I don't know when the last time I slept all the way to the alarm was, but it's been a minute. Yeah. Well, she's in a crate, so I have to let her out. But she often wakes me up. She is the dog, just to clarify. We don't keep children in crates. Happy New Year, everybody. How are you doing? I can't say Merry Christmas anymore. Christmas has passed us by. We are now in the season of Epiphany, and we're going to be celebrating Epiphany today. We'll talk more about that during church. But I see, this must be your work here, Rich.
Yes.
Yeah. Rich has exchanged the wise men for the shepherds. Now the shepherds are back out in the fields, and the wise men have made their way to the stable. Looks good. I told Chris earlier today, I don't know if we're going to get a good shot of this. We don't need to, but this camel right here, it's kind of looking at the camera. He's saying, guess what day it is? Yeah. No, it's Epiphany. Come on, it's not hump day. That's Wednesday. All right. Good to see you. So we are in Colossians chapter 3. Actually, I know where everybody is. Everybody remembers where we left off last time and how much trouble I'm about to get myself in. Colossians chapter 3. And did everybody get a handout, by the way? Handouts are by the front door if you need them. Okay. Colossians 3, starting verses, we'll do 18 to 21. I feel like I should read this so nobody else is in hot water when they go home. Here we go. Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. We're going to stop there for right now, because there's a lot there. It's magnetic. Haha, sweet. Okay. We did this, what's it been, 3 weeks ago? So, but we're gonna review real quickly. What are the 4 types of people addressed in these few verses we just read? Wives, husbands, children, and I'm going to say fathers. This used to be a thing that was done in English pretty commonly. We are told by people who have strong feelings about this stuff that you can't do this anymore. But it used to be that when you were using a mixed gendered group or when the gender was uncertain, the default was to use the masculine, which is why sometimes when you're reading in the ESV, the Greek word would be adelphoi, right? And in the ESV, it'll say brothers, yada, yada, yada. Like, brothers, so I want you to grow in the wisdom and knowledge of the Lord, whatever it is, right? But in the NIV, the newer edition of the NIV, you might see it say brothers and sisters. What's happening in that NIV is not the insertion of extra words. It's an editorial choice that says, when he says brothers, the word actually can include males and females. And to say siblings feels weird culturally. So to get the right feel for our culture across in the translation, we'll simply include and sisters. Okay, so why was I talking about that? Well, because of this. So the word you have is fathers. It may be that this is also inclusive of mothers, because that'd be a weird omission from this list, right? But so it might be that a translation of parents might be valid, but it does say fathers, and so I'm just going to go with fathers. Okay, for reasons that'll come clear in a little bit. Good to see you guys. Welcome. Hey, Russell. So, what, in brief, are the instructions? Let's just take them in order. What are the instructions for wives? Go on, you can say it. Huh? Submit. She did not have premarital counseling with me, did she? All right, submit to husbands. What are the instructions for husbands?
Love your wives and do not be harsh.
What are the instructions for children?
Obey your parents in everything.
And what are the instructions to fathers?
Do not embitter your children.
Yeah. Okay. There's not a whole lot of fancy theologizing that goes into these verses. Not really. It pretty much just lays this out, right? Let's start up here. Why do husbands and wives get different sets of instructions? Different roles. Okay. Can you add anything on top of that, or is that the whole thought? I want to push people a little bit if I can.
I think fathers have more women's.
We're here right now.
With wives.
Yeah, husbands and wives. There's a strange. I mean, it's not strange if you understand what's going on, but there is a historically aberrant push going on in our culture today, and that is, at its most basic level, a blurring of the line between man and woman. And what follows on to that is also a disillusion of the differences between husbands and wives, right? In fact, terms like partner and spouse are becoming much more commonly used by the folks who are, I'm going to air quotes, enlightened than husband and wife. Many of us have an idea of what a stereotypical role of a husband and a stereotypical role of a wife is. Okay? Right? Wouldn't you agree? If I just say that, you kind of know. And well, just for grins, when you picture that, does any particular moment in history or era come to mind where men and women are occupying those stereotypical roles of husbands and wives? Like the 50s, yeah. Yeah, which is pre-60s, which is when the feminist revolution happened, right? Keep this in mind. When we picture that 50s life, you got like June and Ward Cleaver, right? Where June is home, taking care of the home. She takes care of the kids, but they're in school anyways. And then Ward, he goes off and he does the job. I don't know what his job is. I don't know if any of us know it. Maybe they said it, but do you know what his job was? It's not important to the story. But he's away, making money, providing for the family. He's occupying his role. She's occupying hers. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that way of doing things. There can be wrong ways of doing it, okay? But is that laid out in the Bible? That the woman must be a stay-at-home mother, the father must work out of the home, and his basic role is in providing financial stability for his family. Is that outlined in the Bible?
I just want to comment that if that's true, then we're going to be, because we don't earn enough money, we just want income anymore. So it's just want to
Well, interestingly, in Proverbs 31, when it talks about like the ideal woman, part of what it talks about is her going into the marketplace and doing business and stuff. Now you could say, well, that's like shopping for groceries. It seems a bit more elevated than that when you read it in Proverbs. We have some exemplary women in the Bible. They don't necessarily occupy that June Cleaver role, right? But does the Bible lay out differences between men and women and differences between husbands and wives? I think that's an easy yes, right? So as we move into these topics, it's really, we need to be careful, as with so many things in Scripture, that we don't take our cultural baggage and impose them on the text. We need to just carefully read it and hear what it has to say. Are men and women different? Yes. Are all women alike? No. Are all men alike? No. Are all women good at the same things? No. Are all men good at the same things? No. Does that mean that there's no difference between men and women or that those differences don't matter? No. There are some tendencies, right? Despite what you may be told, there is strong, solid clinical data to back up that boys and girls, without any influence being exerted on them, tend to have different interests. A simple way of saying it that I've heard is girls tend to be more interested in people. Boys tend to be more interested in things. Now, that's not true of every boy and every girl, but those are tendencies, right? And we shouldn't shy away from that. I think we also shouldn't consider them to be prescriptive, right? Like if you have a boy who's interested in people, that's not bad. You don't need to train that out of him. It's just how he's unique. But it can be really helpful to have a starting place in understanding people. I'm just going to wade hip deep into the tricky waters. So, not all Christian churches make this assertion, although not all churches that identify as Christian will make this assertion. I think you need to be really careful when you do. But most, I think, Christian churches will tell you that the Bible describes marriage as a lifelong union between one man and one woman. We have examples of other things in the Bible. That doesn't mean that they're good or they're God's design. A real easy example I would submit to you is polygamy. God didn't design people to be polygamist. But you do get examples of it in the Bible, right? Like right off the bat, you can think of Abraham, or you can think of Jacob. You might say Abraham, well, he had a wife, and then he had a not quite wife, right? Well, how did that work out between Hagar and Sarah? Was that a good situation? How about between their children, Ishmael and Isaac? Was that a good situation? I mean, if by that you mean hundreds and thousands of years of tribal fighting with one another, right? Well, surely, but Jacob, right? I mean, he had 4 wives or four baby mamas, right? And and that's how we got the 12 tribes of Israel, and that, right? Did you look at how they interacted with each other? I mean, how does the story of Joseph start? It's messy. I don't think it's God's design. God made Adam and Eve as a single perfect pairing, right? He didn't make Adam and Eve and Gwendolyn or something, right? A one-to-one correlation. And that's the way that creation's described, even like where Adam's looking around and he sees that all the animals have a mate. Right? He's like, oh, I want that. Because we believe that God has a design for man and woman, and that it's pretty narrowly defined. We can have discussions like this. You'll notice that when he talks, he says, "Husbands, love your wives." Right? He would say to a husband, "Love your wife," right? We don't find any advice for husbands toward their husbands, or wives toward their wives. You're going to find that in Scripture. That's an argument from silence. So you can't say that that's conclusive. There's plenty of other passages we could go to, but I just think that that's food for thought when people say, well, that was just an old way of thinking. You know, those things don't apply to today. Well, this is what we have to go with. So men and women are different, okay? Again, not all men are identical, not all women are identical, and almost no man will be stereotypically male in every way. You wouldn't want that. Almost no woman is going to be stereotypically feminine in every way, and that's fine too. There's diversity in how God makes us, but that doesn't mean that husband and wife are categories that don't make sense, or that male and female are irrelevant. They matter. Okay, so if that's our foundation, I haven't answered the question yet. If that's our foundation, then why do husbands and wives get different instructions? Well, because they occupy different roles, because they are different to begin with. I didn't check the Greek on this. I should have checked the Greek. I apologize. But it is pretty typical that this would be like the word gune and the word andros, right, which are, or aner, which is like to say, women submit to your men, men submit to your women. There's no separation between the role of husband and the word man, linguistically. Context is why we translate them different ways. We know that we're talking about a marriage relationship, so we opt for the word wife and the word husband. Yeah.
My little translation here, I've got the expanded, and instead of submit, it also has, which I think is an interesting way to say it, it says yield, yield to the authority, which is a little bit softer word, I think, than submit. I think with submit, we have the, I do at least, I think of it in a harsher type way versus yielding.
Yeah. So, submission is what the jiu-jitsu guy extracts out of the other guy, right? Yeah. Yeah, I think so. But then, I think submit actually has an interesting connotation to it as well, if we can brace ourselves for how shocking it sounds. Because there is a voluntary setting aside that goes on here, right? I think that's why this word is probably so good. The sort of misogynistic, like hyper 50s era view of man and woman that we were talking about earlier, somebody who's deeply entrenched in that might say to you, well, this is natural. I don't think it is. I think if it was natural, he wouldn't have to tell people to do it. I think this is difficult for many women. I don't believe the Bible encourages weak women. I don't think the Bible encourages weakness in women or in men. I think the Bible encourages strong men and strong women. Okay? God blessed me with a strong woman, and I'm very thankful for that. Submission does not mean domination. Okay? If this happens unwillingly, then that's what's going on. But that's not what we're talking about here.
By the way, if you've ever been a leader or led something, or you've been on a team where you had a leader who was dominating, that is the worst kind of leader, right?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be a part of that team.
Yeah.
So, as a husband, if you're dominating, even though you've been put in this position of authority, if you're a dominating type person, beating your wife into submission, metaphorically, not literally.
Yeah.
That is not going to probably be a happy marriage.
No,
Right?
no. And it's not good for either of you. I'm gonna read from Ephesians chapter 5. It has a similar section, but it's expanded more. Okay? I want to read the parallel here. I want you to hear the whole thought, because I think you're getting it in brief. And I want to give it to you in full. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. As to the Lord. That sounds pretty grandiose. Let's keep going. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. And as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. And then it goes on to say, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. There's a lot. His section for husbands is much bigger because the responsibilities are steep. For anybody who thinks you can take these passages and have a man lord it over a woman, you don't understand what he's saying. Our parallel here is between Christ and the church, where our analogy is husband is to wife as Christ is to church, right? You get that? What does that mean? Well, let's start with husbands. How is Christ the head of the church? You could say, well, he calls all the shots. Would that were so. And he could make it so. He has the power to force that to be the case, but he doesn't. But how is he head of the church? Well, vision, leadership, obviously. But what is said in the text explicitly? Oh, well, Christ is head because he went and stuck his neck out for the church. Christ is head because he laid down his life for the church. It's a little bit less powerful, but it's a little bit more in our vernacular to say, Christ is head of the church because he jumped in front of the bullet for the church, right? You know what it means to be head in your family? It means you take a bullet for your wife. It means you do the hard thing, right? It means leading, but it doesn't mean leading from the back and commanding. It means leading from the front and taking the hit, and doing the hard thing and suffering. I do not find that Christ domineers over his church. I do not find that. Here's what I find about Christ and his church. Christ does everything he can to help his church become its fullest, most beautiful, and powerful self. Because he loves it. Right? Because it's listed in this order, it's easy for us to get here and stop and then freak out. But actually, I think because of the context we're coming from, it helps to understand what husbands are supposed to be about. Because, ladies, you have a husband who would take a bullet for you, or at least will take out the garbage without complaining. No. Let's keep it serious, right? If you have a husband who's willing to lay down his life for you, how much easier does it make this? Because this feels unnatural, I think, for many women. Because women are smart. Not all women. Just like not all men are smart. Not all men are strong, neither are all women. But, generally speaking, women are smart, and they're smart in ways that men aren't typically. Men will be smart in other areas, right? Unfortunately, I think sometimes the ways that women are smart makes respecting their husband more difficult, right? You are probably, let's say you have a husband who is respected in the community or in his field. There's a high probability that he is more respected out there than he is at home. It doesn't mean he's not respected at home, but those people don't wash his dirty clothes, right? Those people out there don't see his personal foibles, right? They don't see him do dumb things, right? They don't share a bathroom with him, Like, there's just things that when you're close to a person, you can put a stranger on a pedestal. But when you live with the person, that is very, very difficult and probably ill-advised, right? But here's something else I'll tell you. And y'all who have been experienced in marriage for a long time, you maybe understand this. You as the wife have so much power in how strong and confident and able your husband will be as he goes out into the world. You can break him down like no one else can. You can build him up like no one else can. And for him to be the man that God needs him to be, well, the man that God designed him to be, he needs you to help him be that. There's a great book based on this Ephesians 5 section. I'm going to go back to, because we're not studying Ephesians, and maybe we'll come back to that some other time. I'm going to go back to Colossians. But there's a great book. They do marriage seminars and stuff as well, called Love and Respect, and it works in that Ephesians 5 area we were just talking about, where it talks about, as a generality, women crave love, but their natural thing is to give. Women crave love, and their natural tendency is to give love. Men crave respect, and their natural thing is to give respect. Do you know what respect looks like? It looks like you see a man struggling to do the job, and you don't step in. Because he's a man and he can do it, right? If he asks for help, you can help. But you don't offer unsolicited help. Because what you're saying is, I can handle this where you can't. Now, if you're a woman and you've never heard this before, now you understand why when you're struggling, your husband doesn't naturally jump in. Now, maybe you have trained him over the years to jump in, right? If you did, what has happened is that he is learning to act outside of his natural tendencies, right? He is learning that loving you means helping when you haven't asked. Respect often has to do with space. It has a lot to do with tone of voice. It has a lot to do with recognizing competency. It often has to do with speaking about what a person did. Love is about nearness, right? It is about respecting the person. Oftentimes it's more emotionally grounded. So, speaking about who a person is more of a love thing, whereas speaking about how a person performed is more of a respect thing. Men need your respect, but it is quite frequently the case that a woman will give love, and she doesn't even understand how you can, this is a strange phenomenon, but you can be very loving and also disrespectful. Yes?
A lot of this revolves around ego, and of course Christ always said that you need to deny yourself and do for others, not think of yourself.
Yes.
And that's basically what this is saying.
Yes.
Wives, think of other people, think of husbands, do what's right, don't think of yourself. Same way with children, same way with fathers.
Yep.
And I saw it in my life's, I see my grandparents, they both farmed, homesteaded, they were a partnership, they had separate roles, but they respected each other. The ego didn't get involved.
Yep.
My parents, my dad was the breadwinner, my mother wasn't, but they had different roles, but there was never any ego involved. And then when I got married, I was going to school, my wife had finished school and was working, and she came home and said, I can't do it all, I need your help. And I went, okay.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, oh, well, I don't do dishes or I don't fold clothes.
Right, because this man and woman, husband and wife role thing that we're talking about, it's not about who does what chores. Like, that gets it totally wrong. It's about understanding the unique and different needs of the other person and giving it to them as best you're able, right? So, I said it's possible to love someone and also disrespect them. You do this with your children all the time, especially if they're young. Like, I try to show my son decency, right? I try to teach him good manners, but I don't respect his competency, at least not early on. He's got to grow in that, right? And this is what can happen many times in a marriage, I'm not saying yours, but in some marriages, where a woman can be very affectionate to her husband, but she also kind of treats him like he's incompetent. Right? The love is there, but the respect is not. I know some of you are thinking, but my husband is incompetent. Tearing him down is not going to fix that. Well, yeah. So similarly, husbands, you can be very respectful to somebody and not love them, right? It's, we have a kind of an older group here, so that probably is normal for you. I find that a lot of younger guys these days are more open to telling their friends that they love them. But that was a thing that maybe many of you have never done with a male friend. Certainly you didn't in your younger days. Colleagues, we will frequently respect colleagues, but we won't love them, right? And that can happen in a marriage too, right? Where we're trafficking in respect, but there's no love, and so the affection dies, and it can feel very functionary in the house. It can feel like a business. It can feel like a partnership, but marriage is more than partnership, right? So we're given these commands to help us give the other one what they need, because it may not come natural to us. Yeah.
I just want to comment that, I work with kids, troubled kids in a mental hospital, and I see a lot male and male fights and female fights, and I see that the concept that the boys is like always about respect, and you can see through it that they feel disrespected. But the women, the girls are different. It's like they fight because they feel like you hurt their feelings and stuff like that. So it's kind of like you can see it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's move on to our next one. So children and parents. So Paul says, obey your parents in everything. That's a big statement. But actually, I think that I want to be careful as I do this because, you don't want to override Scripture. But are there some scriptural reasons that we ought to put limits on that idea, that you must obey your parents in everything? Okay, so one of the things you'll find in Scripture is Jesus talking about how, parents will turn against their children, children against their parents, son-in-law against mother-in-law, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, all that kind of stuff. Brothers against brother. Well, why are they turning against each other? Well, because Christ is a dividing line. We like to think about Christ as a unifier, and he is, but he's also a dividing line, right? We're not united with people who are not with him. You ought to obey your parents in everything, except when doing so means disobeying God, right? And the math on this is really easy, because your parents, your earthly father is your father, but God the Father is your first father, right? So if your dad's like, you can't go to, don't read that stupid Bible, like, well, no, read the Bible, dude. Like, do it. Says you can't go to church, go to church, right? If he tells you not to pray, you pray. If he tells you not to take the keys and go run around with your friends, you say, yes, sir, right? That, I think, is pretty, well, why do we think this obedience thing is so important? That's worth teasing out a little bit. Why is obeying your parents so important? I mean, yeah.
It's more about cooperation. Like, my daughter is kind of like always says no usually. So it also has come to the point where it bothers me, but I don't want her to be the other way either. I don't want her to say yes to everything. So I need to toe the line and say, okay, we need, at least talk to me about why you say no instead of...
Let's come back to that in a minute, because that's here, I think. But why is this important? Why is the obedience part of it important? Yeah, go ahead.
I think when you have children as a parent, you know your children better than they know themselves. Children are usually looking at what they aspire to be and what they think they are. Mm-hmm. They really don't know. They may not know that that they still think maybe they're going to be a professional baseball player, professional basketball player, whatever, right? Whereas you as a parent, hey, you're good, but I need to steer you and make sure you're doing your schoolwork and other. You can make smarter decisions longer term for them. Now there is a change at some point, right, as they reach adulthood, where they become more self-real. They realize who they are, and then they know themselves better than you know them, right? And that's kind of a humble moment as a parent when they reach that point as an adult where they know them. So you think you know them, it's like, oh, well, I'm kind of surprised by that. I guess I didn't. Anyhow, but as children, part of our job as parents is to steer them, and we know them, and we can make better decisions than they can because we know them better than they actually know themselves at that point.
And we need to protect them too.
Yeah.
Hey, it looks neat to put a paperclip in a electrical receptacle. No, you can't do that. Well, I want to do it anyway.
Yeah. There's some very entry-level reasons this is important, right? So like a child does not come pre-programmed with everything it needs for life, right? So they will eat candy for every meal. They will put paper clips in light sockets. They will touch fire. They will, because they're full of curiosity, right? And they're full of curiosity. They're full of hormones, even at a very young age. Like, I'm not talking about puberty. Like, even as a toddler, they are swimming with hormones, guys. They feel big feelings. They don't understand everything. All those are good reasons that a child should obey. But I think also an important part of obedience and why it should be learned as a child is because being able to rein in your own will is very important for the life of a human, and in particular for the life of a child of God. Right? I want you to be obedient to God the Father. A good place to learn that is by being obedient to your earthly father. That'd be a good start. Because you think you know. It's possible that he knows things too. But even if not, the practice of obeying, when doing so is, God-pleasing to do so, it's really good for you as a person. One of the in our world today, we have huge self-image issues going on, huge, and we've kind of done it to ourselves, right? There's been a push for 40-ish years, I think, maybe even longer, to really work on children's self-esteem, right? And we say that because kids feel bad about themselves. Self-esteem is not the way to help a kid not feel bad about themselves, right? What happens is many well-intentioned attempts to prop up a kid's self-esteem gives them a false sense of their own ability or their own status. Many kids feel as if they are an adult when they engage in conversation or when they're told to do things or whatever. And that's not just a teenager problem, right? It starts much earlier than that. If children learn obedience, then they have a more realistic view of where they fit in the world. A child is not an adult, and hopefully we all know that, right? Now, there is a point at which, because it's a continuum, there's a point at which it starts to get fuzzier, as they get into their mid and upper teens. They're starting to become more like an adult. Legally at 18, we say they're adults, but anybody who knows anything knows, okay, sure, but they're not full grown yet. They may not get any taller, although many will. But their brain is not fully formed. And that's like, I'm not being silly about that. That's like science. Their brain is not fully formed yet. Maturation is a lifelong process. However, I need to get back on this. So, the importance of obedience. So you get a lot of folks who have grown up thinking that they are the boss of themselves. Well, when things aren't going well, who is to blame? And where do you go? If you're the boss of you kind of have nowhere to turn, right? Better for us to learn obedience so that we can put our will below, so we can put our will second and just do the thing. So parents, you need to teach your kids obedience. And I'm not saying that as a guy who's mastered it. I'm not surprising you guys. You know, we are mortal parents, right? That said, the onus isn't all on the child, right? What is this? Fathers, do not embitter your children. What is this responsibility that's being given here? What are we supposed to do?
Set the example.
Set the example? Okay.
Don't tell them to do something and you behave differently. I've seen that happen many, many times.
Okay, so there is a certain level of hypocrisy you want to avoid, right? So if you're asking your kids to do something, you ought to be able to model that yourself. I think that's true. I think there's some good weight there. What else? Do not embitter your children. Maybe to think this through, how do you embitter your children? How does that happen?
I know it seems blatant, but like cursing on them, or at least what do you call it? At least insinuating things.
Yeah. So when you work in such a way that you devalue them and undercut them, right? Speaking disparagingly to your child, it doesn't mean that you should lie to your child, right? But there's a way to parent where the child feels like there is no winning. You should have high standards for your child, right? But at the same time, you need to parent the child you have, not the child you wish you had, right? Or not the best possible of all children. If you've got multiple kids, and I don't, but if you do, then you'll know you can't parent them the same way. You can't. The differences between those children will make that approach really good for this kid and really bad for this kid. Right? So I think a big part of this, not embittering your child, is being responsive to the kid. Pay attention. When they're trying to obey and they fail, show them grace, right? When obedience is difficult for them, be patient. As a parent, you are literally the bigger person. You need to be the bigger person, right? There are some kids who, they grow up in a house where they can do nothing right. Well, how does a kid like that turn out? Embittered. So they will either just walk into life feeling as if they are an utter failure, and it will take them decades, if they ever climb out of that. Or they will just give up trying to please you, and they will rebel. And you will have set them back in their life considerably. Because being able to work with authorities is a really important part of life. Yeah.
There might be another level to that too, in terms of the father's view of life, how he treats his neighbor, how he treats his wife, and that would be certainly an impression on the child in the future.
Yeah. So what your children see in you, will be very informative as they start to shape their own worldview. And that doesn't mean that they will turn out like you. It does in some ways probably mean that, but it also might mean that they rebel against exactly that. So our goal here is to be in a relationship with our children where we don't make obeying you so difficult. We don't want our homes to be law-based, right? We want, well, I'm just going to speak to fathers for a moment. You want to love your children the way your Heavenly Father loves you, which is unconditionally accepting you as His child, loving you regardless of how you perform, but also laying out a vision for what life should be like, and applying discipline where necessary to help that child grow into the man or woman that they were made to be, right? Responsibility flows both ways here. Responsibility flows both ways here. And it's really important that we keep that in mind, because it's really easy to put the onus on the other person. to be frustrated that the child will not obey, to be frustrated because my husband just won't love me, or whatever. And maybe that's true. But we also need to take careful stock of our responsibility to the other. Right? All right, I'm at time. We didn't get to the back page yet, which is when things are going to get even more scandalous, because now we're going to go on to talk about slavery. So next week, we'll do that next week. Stick around, we got worship coming up in about 10 minutes, and yeah, see you there.